What's up guys? Before I start the review, I would like to thank all of my subscribers for getting me to 100 subs. I had one goal with this channel when I started, and that was to get to 100 before the 1 year mark, which I achieved thanks to all you guys. Thank you kindly. So today I am of course reviewing Kung Fu Panda 4, which is directed by Mike Mitchell and stars Jack Black, Awkwafina, Bryan Cranston, James Hong, Ian McShane, Quan, Dustin Hoffman, and Viola Davis. In this movie, a new threat rises in the form of the Chameleon, a shapeshifter who poses a threat to Po, who must handle the passing on of the Dragon Warrior title to his successor. Let me start this review off by saying that I really like the Kung Fu Panda movies. I rewatched all three in preparation for this review, and all three of the original trilogy are quite good in my opinion. I go back and forth on whether I like the first or second movie the best. It used to be the second, but after rewatching all three in close succession, the winner isn't as clear-cut for me anymore, which speaks volumes about the quality of the series, and in particular of those first two movies. The third film was, I think, the weakest of the three, and after watching this one, I think it switched to Kung Fu Panda 4. I think that this movie is sadly a bit devoid of some of the emotional impact that comes to mind when I think of Kung Fu Panda. This is by far the most straightforward of the four films in terms of plot, and with a shallow antagonist, I think that this is my least favorite of the four. However, that's not to say that this film is bad by any means. I just think that fans of this franchise have come to expect a certain status of quality from these films, and I think that this entry falters in that regard. This movie is just nothing special, which is in stark contrast to the other three, which in my mind undoubtedly are. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I would first like to address the elephant in the room, which is the lack of certain characters who should have been in this movie. The absolute audacity of DreamWorks to put the the Furious Five in the poster. They are literally only in the movie as like a scene that plays in the background while the credits begin to roll. And the movie gives the excuse that they're off on kung fu adventures, but man, that was a loss on the filmmaker's part. Part of me thinks that this is due to budgetary concerns because getting Angelina Jolie, Seth Rogen, Lucy Liu, David Cross, and Jackie Chan would have raised the budget quite a bit. As it stands, however, it is a big disappointment. I mean, none of the five even have any speaking roles in that credit scene. There are other characters that I won't spoil just yet from previous Kung Fu Panda installments that are present in this movie, and they also don't have speaking roles. Obviously, Ian McShane reprises his role as Tai Lung, but that feels like the bare minimum, even though Ian McShane does have a really cool voice.
See this packet. Parabellum.
Moving on, as I previously stated, Awkwafina is in this movie. Yay, my favorite. She's been popping up more and more in animated movies, and her voice is just so grating to me. In terms of animated movies she's been in, there's Storks, the Angry Birds movie 2, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, Raya and the Last Dragon, The Bad Guys, and most recently, Migration. That is way too many movies for someone with her voice in my opinion. And now she's gonna be in Wildwood, the upcoming Laika stop-motion film. No. She wasn't the worst thing in the world in this movie, but it's just weird how much she's pushed to be in animated movies to me. Just get an actual voice actor. More and more, regular actors are playing roles that can be filled by voice actors. And I know I was just complaining about the Furious 5 actors not being here, but that's different, okay? They've been playing those roles since 2008 and are iconic by this point. I'm just saying, if you're introducing a new character in the fourth entry of an animated film franchise, give that role to an actual voice actor or something. Literally anything except cast Awkwafina, which seems to be the default these days. Anyways, Viola Davis is pretty good as the Chameleon. Speaking of the Chameleon, she is far and away the weakest villain in the franchise. While I don't really agree with the statement, a movie is only as good as its villain, I will admit that is actually a very apt description of the Kung Fu Panda franchise. For instance, I can't decide between Tai Lung and Lord Shen as my favorite villain, which ties into the fact that I can't decide between Kung Fu Panda or Kung Fu Panda 2 as my favorite of these movies. I think from the original trilogy, Kai was my least favorite villain, which leads to that movie, Kung Fu Panda 3, being my least favorite of the three. However, I still like him as a villain, and I still like that movie. The Chameleon is by far the worst villain, and this movie is, again, the worst one in my opinion. The Chameleon was just not as emotionally impactful or relevant to our main characters as Tai Lung or Lord Shen were, and even General Kai had a past with Master Oogway that created an interesting dynamic. This movie just doesn't have that. The chameleon is just a weak individual who wants to be strong. Okay, this is just a very basic motivation, and it feels like something a kid with action figures could have come up with. Like, I'm weak, but I want to be strong. Again, this isn't like a terrible thing, it's just that I've come to expect so much more from these movies. As it stands, the chameleon has very shallow motivations. Moving on, I'd like to briefly discuss the art direction in this film. So, as I previously stated, this movie's director is Mike Mitchell, who previously directed Shrek Forever After for DreamWorks and also directed Trolls, as well as the Lego Movie 2, the second part. So this is not his first foray into animated films, and I really liked that this movie has some splashes of color with its art style. Sometimes it'll be a relatively dark shot that's intercut with like a slice showing a close-up on a character. I could feel some sort of anime inspiration bleeding in at times, and since I do like some anime, this is a win in my book. These movies have always had these really cool animated segments where it goes into like a different art style, or it'll change into negative color to make it look really epic and cool and heighten the drama, and I really like what they did here. The neon splashes of color do accentuate those darker shots, like this one from the trailer. The score for the movie isn't quite as good as the scores for the previous 3 installments. Hans Zimmer and John Powell's score for the first movie in particular is low-key really good, and some tracks in Kung Fu Panda 2 are similarly great. This movie, however, doesn't really have any memorable tracks for me, except that there is this cover of Crazy Train that was pretty good. It was kind of funny because they also played Crazy Train during the Inside Out 2 trailer before the movie, so I kind of OD'd on Crazy Train. Maybe the lack of memorable tracks is due to the fact that unlike the first 2 films, Kung Fu Panda 4's score keeps Hans Zimmer but replaces John Powell with Steve Mazzaro. Kung Fu Panda 3 also doesn't have John Powell, and that score is just Hans Zimmer. And that movie's soundtrack is also a little lackluster. Maybe the less John Powell in these movies, the lower the quality of the soundtrack. I was surprised that the Seven Nation Army cover from the trailer isn't present in the final film, but that's not really important. One last thing I wanted to bring up before doing a really brief spoiler section is the themes of the movie. There are several, such as that of change. Poe passing on the mantle of Dragon Warrior to another individual is brought up a lot in this movie, mostly because he wants to keep being the Dragon Warrior. However, Master Shifu tells him that he has to do this in order to become the spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace. So, firstly, I don't think that 3 movies of being the Dragon Warrior is enough. Maybe it's because I saw them in such quick succession recently, but I do feel like I didn't get enough of Poe as the Dragon Warrior. Maybe I just like that character that much, but I don't know. I'm aware that there are several short films and animated TV shows set in this world, but I don't think 3 movies of Dragon Warrior Poe is quite enough. There are multiple lines of dialogue across the other films where Master Shifu says something along the lines of, "Wow, Poe, you learned that move at such a young age when it took me years to learn." Poe is too young to be retiring by the 4th movie. Also, if you have to pass on the mantle of Dragon Warrior to become the spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace, does that mean that Master Oogway was the Dragon Warrior in the first film? It never hints at anything like that, and it also never says that Oogway moved on to become the spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace. Am I getting too caught up on the rules of an animated kids franchise? Probably. Another theme of this movie is that of peace over violence. Poe just wants to beat people up while Shifu urges him to choose peace as an outcome. However, at every turn in this movie, the characters use violence to get their way. Whether this is used for comedic effect or not, it's a fact. The only moment where peace is used as a resolution is at the end by Poe unsuccessfully. And so then he just resorts to violence and wins. Huh? Interesting lesson. I think the execution of this theme wasn't handled quite as well as it could have been. The film addresses this very slightly by having Poe see Shifu in his head finally being proud of him for doing things his way, peacefully, after being disappointed in Poe throughout the whole movie. And then Shifu says, "Well, you tried it my way, which I'm proud of, now do it yours," which leads to Poe using violence to get his way, and he wins. Oh well, I don't think that this movie is gonna make a strong enough impression on kids anyway, so who cares? Whatever. But the critical Red Review's eye is always watching, and no film is safe. For instance, did you know that there's a move that Poe does in this movie with a knife that references a move that Shifu does with a knife in the first movie? Yeah, I bet you didn't pick up on that, but Red Reviews is always watching, baby. Okay, this is your slight spoiler section. There is literally nothing in this movie that you can't foresee a mile away unless you haven't seen the trailer. But if you're really, really, really excited for Kung Fu Panda 4, I guess go somewhere else. So of course, Ian McShane reprises his role as Tai Lung, and in the same scene, Lord Shen and General Kai return, but the characters have slight redesigns. In Lord Shen's case, it's a pretty major redesign, and he seems to be a lot smaller than he was in Kung Fu Panda 2. Sadly, just like the Furious Five, neither the great Gary Oldman nor the formidable J.K. Simmons reprised their roles as the villains they played, which is what we in the industry call a missed opportunity. There really isn't anything you can't see coming from a mile away, and that betrayal on Awkwafina's character Jen's part was the most cliche trope I have seen in a movie in recent memory. Trust is also a pretty big theme in the movie, because Po is too trusting of people, and Awkwafina's character Jen is not trusting at all of people because she's this thief. But I don't know, it was so cliche. It was so, I've seen this a million times before. Also, her being appointed Dragon Warrior by Po, in addition to feeling unearned, makes me dread hearing her voice in a sequel, which Mike Mitchell has expressed interest in making. I think it would have been so awesome to bestow the title of Dragon Warrior to Tigress, as I believe would have happened in the first film had Po not intervened. Mitchell did say that he wants to involve the Furious Five more if Kung Fu Panda 5 ever happens, and I really hope that that's the case. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this review. Kung Fu Panda 4 doesn't have anything that you haven't seen before, which will come as a disappointment for some fans of the franchise. Not every joke lands, but some do. I laughed a couple times during the movie, so there are some good jokes here, especially involving Mr. Pin and Li Shen. James Hong and Bryan Cranston have some pretty good comedic timing in this movie, and the scenes with the two of them together were my favorite parts of the film. If I had to sum this movie up in one word, it would be fine. When I saw the trailer, I remember thinking this looks pretty mid, and I still feel that way after having seen the movie. That's the other thing. DreamWorks has kind of skipped out on the marketing for this movie with almost nothing except a single trailer and poster to market it by. I remember when the trailer first came out, my friends and I all watched it at school. They thought it looked great, but they can also testify that my opinion was that it looked mid. Well, Zach, Ethan, Mitch, who was right? Laughing all the way to the bank. That's this guy. And they released this Sand and Spice trailer, which is an obvious reference to Dune, and is clearly an attempt to ride on the success of Dune Part 2. This is never going to be at the same level of quality that Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was at, but it still managed to disappoint me a bit. The Kung Fu Panda movies have always been really good Kung Fu movies in their own right, not just as animated Kung Fu movies. This film definitely stands as the weakest, most average one of the bunch. But if you're looking for a movie to take your kids to during this time of year, I don't think this is half bad. And this movie also has the first instance of Po saying the words Kung, Fu, and Panda in that order in a movie. So that's a pretty sick bonus. Thank you so much for watching this video, and go have a nice day. What's left of it. Peace.